the hunt here, do you?
Did he say this to the Pope? Okay, anyway. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Today is March the 29th, 2020. To the live audience, can you guys see us?
Please say no.
Please say no. Something weird's going on. So our guest today is Kevin Lucia. Wow, no video, just audio. That is weird. All right, give me a second. Talk amongst you. Why don't you guys do introductions while I fix this?
Okay, let me go first.
All right.
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter. I have a prize again this week, believe it or not. It is the paperback version of the collection from Dark Regions Press called The Red Brain, edited by S.T. Joshi. It's mostly a reprint book. There are a few original stories. There's some original art. If you want to win this book, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put brain in the subject heading. In about 2 weeks, I'll pick a winner. It could be you.
Thanks, Matt. And just FYI, I fixed the video for the audience. Software is being moody. Bridget, why don't you go next?
Hello, I'm Bridget Brenmark. I'm a composer and artist, and I love horror, so I love figuring out how those things go together. And I make music boxes of the macabre. Creepy music boxes with creepy music.
Yes, you do. Okay, we fixed that video too, so thank you. Forget who said we were cut off on the right. Rich.
Oh yeah, there it is.
We're here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rich. I'm just a reader, lover of horror. Got a library. Used to have a beard. No longer.
Beard's coming back.
It's coming back.
A beard.
Doesn't everyone have a beard now? You don't have to shave to go to work.
Oh no, I got dress code issues. I got told what my at home dress code was.
Well,
I was informed by my wife that I could not grow an apocalypse beard. So
See, I'm more interested in the fact when this is all done, are the writers and producers of my 600-pound life going to come and find me, or how do I get in touch with them? That's just all I want to know.
I think the important thing to remember is that you change from your morning pajamas to your evening pajamas.
Yes.
So.
And you take your 1 o'clock in the afternoon shower.
What?
What?
Shower?
Shower? Water?
Shower.
Rick.
Rick Lay writer who does escape from a story written by our guest.
Yeah, Rick was telling quite the story about it before you got here, Kevin. You want to tell him, Rick?
Yeah, I was trying to finish Things You Need before this podcast. I only got 70% through it. And I realized I didn't have enough time, so I was going to do one last story. It was the story was the guy with the cell phone in the used store with the mattresses and everything.
Yep.
Which is probably the longest story in that book. And I felt this is going on. I'm trapped in the story with this guy. It's never going to end.
And we got a guest panelist today, Paul Olson, who's been a guest on the show before. Paul, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Paul Olson. I'm a writer and editor. I've written a couple of novels and a bunch of short stories. I've got a collection out called Whispered Echoes. Edited 3 anthologies, done a magazine, done a newsletter. And when I was here in January as a guest, my bandwidth was low and you had to shut off my picture. So if my picture disappears again tonight, that's why my bandwidth crapped out. But right now it's looking good, I guess.
Yeah, you're doing good.
And Mike asked me to be here because Kevin and I are friends. So.
Yes, and our guest is Kevin Lucia, who's eating dinner.
I am,
Yeah. You want to say something about yourself, and then we'll interrogate you while you try to eat?
Yeah, sure. I'm the review editor at Cemetery Dance Publications. I also write a column there called Revelations, which actually Paul was the subject of one of my columns. The column is just kind of chronicling how I, a couple of years ago, started trying to deepen my education in the horror genre, and reading all these different authors besides Stephen King. I mean, we all love Stephen King, but we get to that point where we want to discover new authors. And I've got several books out there. They're all on Amazon. The one that's out right now is Mystery Road, my first limited edition hardcover through Cemetery Dance.
Thanks, and I don't think I got to Pete.
What? Oh, Pete Rollick, writer, alcoholic. Sure, why not?
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Functioning alcohol.
High functioning.
Well, functioning.
Hey.
I'm Mike Davis with Lovecraft eZine. I'm not sure what it is I do, but this is one of the things I do. And like I said, our guest is Kevin Lucia. He writes a lot of what we would call quiet horror. So does Paul Olson. Whispered Echoes is a very, very good book. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's excellent. And Bloody Bones has got to be one of the best stories I've read in the last couple of years. It's really good.
God, yeah. Yeah, that was great. So yeah, pick up Whispered Echoes, folks, if you haven't done that yet. And so I want to kind of set the tone here because there's a really for this interview, there's a really good quote by Tad Williams that I've loved for a long time. And here it is. There are worlds beneath your feet, lurkers behind the stairs, and shapes that wait just the other side of boarded doorways, which you have only glimpsed in your dreams. And I actually don't think that's part of his work. I think that's part of a blurb that he did for another book, but I can't remember which one. But I just think that really is a good tone setter for quiet horror. So
Yeah, it is.
yeah. Now, Rich, you had a question before we went live. You wanted to ask Kevin something, and I think that's a good start.
Yeah,
this.
Kevin, I just want to know what is quiet horror?
So, quiet horror, it was actually coined, I believe, and Paul probably knows better than I would because he was a contemporary of Charlie Grant's. But it was.
He's saying you're old, Paul.
Yeah, I know. I got that.
It was coined in the late 70s, early 80s, I think, primarily to describe Charlie Grant's work. It's that idea where horror is more reliant on atmosphere and very human-based fears. It's got it establishes a creeping sense of dread. Charlie Grant's not only one of them. I mean, T.M. Wright. I think it was Ramsey Campbell called T.M. Wright a one-man virtuoso, quiet horror virtuoso. Alice Antonio.
Would you throw Ray Bradbury in there?
Yeah, Ray Bradbury did all of that though. He had. There's this one good. I can't remember the name of. There's one good, really gruesome story that he wrote. So he did everything. But
Yeah.
Alan Peter Ryan. Ramsey Campbell. That's what I've always thought of as a quiet horror. Is that it's got that its reliance is on that what you don't see.
I can see people listening to this later, rewinding to write down all those authors that you just mentioned, because I know I will be, because I didn't recognize some of the names.
Yeah, and that's what I had a really great experience. About 7 or 8 years ago. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with Borderlands Boot Camp, the writing boot camp that Tom Montiel and Paul Wilson run. I had attended it, and I invited them up to my school to work with my students. And they invited me out that night because they said they had a friend who lived in Binghamton. Which I was scratching my head because I'm from Binghamton. I'm just like, well, I mean, Rod Serling's from Binghamton, but I don't know anybody else important. And when I got over to their friend's house, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Whispers magazine and the Whispers anthologies.
Stuart David Schiff.
So Stuart David Schiff lives in Binghamton, and he's Paul and Tom's friend. So I spent the entire night just kind of like sitting there goggle-eyed as Paul Wilson, Tom Montielone, and Stuart Schiff just rattling off all these names that I'd never heard of. So that's exactly what I did. Was like, I remember all these down.
Wait, what'd you say?
Exactly. My wife was a little dismayed looking at our checking account the next day because I went straight home and started on Amazon going, buy that. and Charlie was one of those authors that I discovered in that, in that binge there. So
Yeah, that's one of the faux complaints that I get about this show is that we mentioned so many good books that people have to go and buy them and read them. So
Well, it's
I,
not a bad complaint.
I don't think it's a
It's
real
a good
complaint.
job
No.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know what? I guess I'd have to ask, what attracts you to quiet horror, Kevin, as opposed to, say, another stripe of horror?
I really don't know what it is. I just can tell you that when I discovered it, it really spoke to me. You
Mhm.
know, I mean, it took a while for me to decide that I was a horror writer anyway. You know, I mean, I fell in love with Stephen King late in life, like in my late 20s. I'd always wanted to write science fiction, and then my early attempts were just really, they read like Star Trek novelizations. They weren't really good science fiction. And I loved what Stephen King did, but I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if that's really me. And then when I finally decided I wanted to write horror, and I was in the horror, like I was working for Shroud magazine at the time, if anyone remembers them, writing reviews for them. I was getting all the leisure, ARCs, and I liked a lot of those books, but I just thought to myself, I don't see myself, like, I love what Ray Garton does. I don't think I could do that. Or I love what Ed Lee does. I love what Jack Ketchum does, but that's not me. And the very first quiet horror book I actually picked up was The Place by T.M. Wright. I was at Nikon, and I was browsing through the used books, and I found this book called The Place, and I read it, and it was spooky and atmospheric, but there was substance to it, which is not to imply that things like splatterpunk don't have substance. I mean, there's great splatterpunk writers like John Skip and Ed Lee, and there's a lot of imitators. But for me, it just spoke to my sensibilities. Like, that's the type of guy I am. That's the way I don't know. And I just, once I started writing it, and I found my voice. Before that, I was trying to write lots of I'm writing a horror story now. This one's about a vampire. This one's about a werewolf. And I was trying to write, and then when I discovered quiet horror, it just sort of turned my gaze inward, and it just really spoke to me.
I kind of almost hesitated because I was multitasking in my mind, thinking, how would I answer that question? Because I very much love quiet horror, and like you said, I don't know if there's a really good answer to the question, but or accurate. I think it happens in degrees, maybe. I don't know. It's different for different people. But I wrote about it in the introduction to Autumn Cthulhu, where my parents moved us from Texas to Iowa, and in Texas, Halloweens are hot. It's still pretty hot on October 31st. In Iowa, it's cool. There's leaves everywhere, the whole thing, and I kind of fell in love with it then, even though I didn't really know. I wouldn't have been able to identify what it was. You know, uh, there were kids out there trick or treating. There was a bit of fog. I mean, you name it.
Yep.
Chill in the air, all that stuff.
Yeah, you have a very Bradbury-esque descriptions of autumn leaves skittering across the sidewalk, and the air smells like burnt cider, things like that. Yeah, that's why Bradbury, a lot of his work is good quiet horror. It's got that really, I think of like Something Wicked This Way Comes, and the collection The October Country, and
Right, exactly. And that blurb in front of the October Country, I can't quote it from memory, but that's pretty awesome. That country where it's always turning late in the year,
yes,
that one.
Yeah, the autumn people. Yeah, I love that. I post that on Facebook every October, every year. I love it.
Autumn people thinking only autumn thoughts.
Yep.
So, by the way, everybody, obviously, please feel free to jump in with questions for Kevin anytime you want. I don't need to talk all the time, or even really want to. So,
I have a question. Okay. Now, this was just striking to me because I was thinking the Twilight Zone often exemplifies this small town, normal things, but nothing's normal. And I just found it so interesting that you said Rod Serling was from Binghamton too.
He is, yeah. So Rod Serling's house is exactly a mile and a half away from the school where I teach. I teach at Seton Catholic Central High School. And the park right next to our school is called Recreation Park. So he grew up there playing. And if you've ever seen one of my favorite episodes is Walking Distance, one of my absolutely favorite episodes. That episode is supposed to be a homage to Serling's desire to go home and to go back to Rec Park. So if you go to Rec Park in the gazebo, there's a big bronze plaque on the floor of the gazebo that says "Walking Distance, the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling." Because that whole episode is supposed to be about Rec Park and his memories of growing up in Binghamton.
What I had read about, what little I know about him from his biographies that I've read, he was very much changed by his experiences in the Pacific during World War II.
Yes.
And it was like, I remember reading a line by Barbara Tuchman when she was describing in the introduction, I think it was to the Guns of August or something like that, that the First World War sat across like a black chasm between us and the previous time, and there was no way to really cross it except with imagination. And I kind of often thought that applied to Rod Serling's experiences.
Yes. Yeah, I read a couple of biographies. Of course, I read his daughter's biography, As I Knew Him, and some of the letters that they reprint of him, his experiences in the war were, and you can see that there's a couple episodes there. I can't remember the name of it. I can remember the name of it. It's about the one World War II American commander that suddenly finds himself a Japanese commander. And he's written a couple of those episodes that you can see his how that really impacted him. Yeah. And I would say Rod Serling probably also, before they even had a term for it. I mean, the Twilight Zone is just this wonderful thing that's science fiction, fantasy, horror. But I mean, many of those episodes are the epitome of quiet horror. They just had that creeping, sense of wrongness to it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the Twilight Zone. So, Paul, did you have something?
No. So far I agree 100% with everything Kevin said. I just think it might be worth pointing out that quiet horror in the history of the field, that quiet horror is a relatively new thing. There didn't used to be the term for quiet horror.
Nope.
And there are a lot of us who still feel that, we really don't like labels. Although I do consider myself a quiet horror writer and I like quiet horror, there's still a part of me that distrusts any labels. Mm. But the term itself kind of came about, and then Kevin was right that it sort of started with Charlie Grant, and it started when with the rise of splatterpunk, and then there had to be a definition for things that weren't splatterpunk, and so you had people running around saying, "Well, I'm a splatterpunk," and then you had other people who were saying, "Well, I don't write splatterpunk. I guess I write quiet horror." And the other term that Charlie Grant gave it and coined was dark fantasy. And in fact, the magazine that I used to publish in the 80s, Horror Struck, the subtitle was The World of Dark Fantasy. And I kind of thought that encompassed, that whole sensibility. Now, dark fantasy has evolved into a whole different thing that's much more fantasy fiction oriented than horror oriented. But for that time in the 80s and early 90s, dark fantasy was a synonym for quiet horror.
Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead.
No, it's funny because when I get into conversations with some of my younger colleagues, we always just have really fun conversations about that, because to them, dark fantasy is grimdark elves and swords and magic and things like that. And then I'm just like, well, Charlie Grant coined the term, but even before Charlie Grant coined the term, the back of the blurb to Something Wicked This Way Comes is it called it an exploration of the dark fantastic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I think Bradbury is the very definition of dark fantasy.
Absolutely, yeah, especially his early stuff, yeah.
Long before there was the term.
So it's funny, I'd like to just riff off what just Paul said about labels.
Sure.
He is absolutely right about, how limiting labels can be. And he's also, dark or quiet horror. I mean, it used to be gothic romances and things like that in gothic fiction. I can tell you myself, there's been times, or there even now, where I love the comparison to Charlie Grant's work being so influential. But there's other work that I like too. Like, I absolutely love Robert McCammon's work. I don't even know what to come up as a description for Robert McCammon's work besides awesome.
Blue World is one of the best collections I've ever read.
So good, Blue World is, and obviously Boy's Life is just the
absolutely
epitome of. It's that one book that you'll never write anything as good as that. That's right up there. But I know myself, I've often thought I'm glad that I've got this label, like not label, but I'm glad that people like Brian Keene bestowed a wonderful quote on me, calling me this generation's version of Charlie Grant, which is awesome. But I sometimes think to myself, well, I want to write more things than just quiet horror. Like I currently have out right now at beta reading a weird Western with Billy the Kid and flesh-eating zombies. You know what I mean? So I don't want to leave behind the quiet horror, but I'd like to write a couple novels where I just sort of blow some doors open and and have some fun. So
I don't think you have to limit yourself to
Right.
that label, but it is helpful for readers when they say, "Oh, you like quiet horror? You should check out these 3 books by Kevin
Right, yeah.
Lucia or this
Yeah.
book by Paul Olson," and so on and so forth. To the best of my knowledge, anyway, I think that's pretty much what Charles Grant wrote, but not everybody's like that. Laird Barron, cosmic horror. Now he's writing adventure detective. I don't know how to label his new stuff. It's dark, but it's not Lovecraftian like it used to be.
Tim Levin also started as a horror writer with Leisure, and now he's kind of writing suspense thrillers, techno. Like I'm halfway through his latest Eden, and you could call it a thriller, you could call it ecological horror. It's a big mix of things.
I don't know too many successful writers who think about labels when they're writing.
Right. Yeah.
I think labels are for the publishers and
Yep.
shouldn't be for the writers. And if you're thinking about those labels when you're writing, you're probably going to get yourself in some trouble, if not with that project somewhere down the road. So
Yeah.
I'd say let the publishers worry about the labels and write the things that you want to write.
Pete?
Yeah, I remember when the first Joe Lansdale's first Happen Leonard novel came out. The Barnes and Noble, yeah, it's like new writers you should read, and like new writer, I've been reading Joe Lansdale since I was knee high to a grasshopper. What the hell are you talking about? Because he had been so pigeonholed into weird westerns and horror, Twilight Zone horror. No one ever expected him to write this sort of modern Western noir.
Yeah.
That the Happen Leonard series are, and he still every once a while goes back and he writes another, Zeppelin's West novel, or the Talking Seal books. What the hell? This guy's having a lot of fun. That's for sure.
Noir. That's the other word I forgot to throw on to what Laird's doing right now.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, it's. I think Paul's right. These descriptions of what we do, what people write, those are for publishers and bookstores, so they know where to shelve the book. It's not necessarily for where we want to put things or what we want to describe ourselves as.
Well, you do what you love, hopefully, and you write what you love, hopefully, and then if you're a writer and you're the kind of person who loves quiet horror, then, label or not, that's what's going to come pouring out.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I sit down when I write something, I have to feel for my characters, I have to understand them, I have to be having fun with the story, and whatever it is at the end is whatever genre turns out to be.
But here's another interesting thing. And Bloody Bones, that town that Paul wrote, that town seems so real to me. And Paul, forgive me, I don't know if you place stories in the same town or not.
I've placed some stories in the same setting. That wasn't one of them, though. That was completely different setting.
Well, I'll just throw that one out as my favorite. I think you said the same, Kevin. But okay, so Charles Grant, Ox Run Station. You know, he sets a lot of stories in this town called Ox Run Station where weird things happen. He never identifies why they do. We were talking about before we started, and I'm not sure before you came in here, Kevin, about whether that should be done or not. I come on the side of no, but that's just my opinion. You know, so Charlie Grant writes a lot of quiet horror, as labeling, stories set in Ox Run Station, and then Kevin Lucia, Clifton Heights, right? Do I have
Yep.
that right?
Yep.
So,
I've got some questions I want to ask Kevin about that.
yeah, go. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, since you opened the door, yeah, I'm curious because Kevin is, if you're not familiar with his work, he's creating an absolutely brilliant universe of Clifton Heights and Webb County. And I wanted to ask specifically, what was your inspiration for that? Was it a conscious decision, or did you just find it happening as the stories came? They were all set in the same place. And how is it working for you? Are you finding it exciting? Are you finding it limiting?
So the initial idea for this was one of those ideas. I think we've all had these as writers, especially before we start branching out and reading. I had been trying to write a novel for years, very unsuccessful. I hadn't really kind of finished. I hadn't really figured out how to write the end yet. So I also hadn't really. I was struggling with developing a through line for the plot. And what I had was a lot of these little vignettes about all these characters. And it started turning over in my head, like the vignettes about these characters' lives are almost as interesting as the bigger story, you know? So I was like, don't throw these away. Maybe we can develop this, you know, to me, it seemed a very unique thing, right? Oh, I'm doing something no one's ever done before. I want to develop this mythos of interconnected stories. I mean, I knew that Stephen King had done that a little bit with his Castle Rock stories. And of course, if you read The Dark Tower and how it's a multiverse and things like that. But, and I started selling, when I started selling my stories, I was just putting them in the same town. I wasn't worrying if they contradicted each other too much because they were two small press publications. So I kind of figured not many people were reading them. But then I discovered first, actually, Gary Brombeck's Cedar Hill cycle, which is just so phenomenal. I mean, again, what Gary does is like, how can you even give it a term? You know, it's horror, it's magical realism, it's highly philosophical and mythical and even religious in its own way. So I discovered those.
Can you repeat that? Because I have to admit I have not even heard of this.
Gary A. Brombeck.
Oh, Brombeck, right. I haven't read his stuff, but I remember his name now.
Yeah, and the Cedar Hill cycle.
Okay.
And he's written several core books, and like Charlie Grant, written short stories that piece in. And then I did a deep dive. I did what I called my Bradbury Summer Challenge one summer. It was the year that Bradbury passed away. You know, and I'd read several of his novels, but I had not really read. I've read a handful of short stories. So being a teacher, obviously I have a summer off. So the summer he died, I said, well, I'm going to read one Bradbury short story every single day. That quickly became to try not to read 3 or 4 Bradbury stories every single day.
Oh, yeah.
But I literally read almost 200 Bradbury stories. And then I was like, wow, Greentown is one big, I mean, yes, there's Something Wicked This Way Comes in Dandelion Wine and the Halloween Tree. But he's written all these other short stories that happen in Greentown. And then right around that time is when I discovered Charlie Grant too. And rather than being discouraged when I saw that other people had done it, I was just like, now I want to do it too. You know, we also, there's a personal angle. I've been going up to the Adirondacks for vacation over the summer ever since I was a kid. And I just find the atmosphere up there is just so, it's wonderfully spooky. You know, you're in the deep woods. It's very isolated. And it was just something I've always wanted to do. And I've loved doing it. I feel very comfortable doing it. Although I am, like I said, I have one novel that's being beta read that has nothing to do with it. It's a weird Western. And I'm currently sitting down trying to write a very fast-paced horror novel that takes place in the Adirondacks, but doesn't have any connections really to Clifton Heights. So,
Well,
you have a map?
What's that?
You have a map?
Kind of. So Sort of, kind of, not really. But then I also thought to myself, well, this is a really strange town. You know, if you've read Things You Need, then you probably read the story about the guy who drives around collecting junk, and he starts finding out the streets aren't right, and he's lost, and he can't. So if I figured, well, I hope it's not being lazy, but if like someone notices, hey, in this story you made this thing over here, in this story you made it over here, I can be like, your town. But I did actually start having to draw a map because I have outlined. I haven't sat down and written it yet because when I tell you the length of the outline, you'll probably choke. I have written a 35-page outline synopsis of like this big coming of age story. And then that's when I realized, wait, I'm trying to carry out this plot over like a whole year. I really need to know where everything is. So I did start sitting down because at that point, like I've never written anything like this before, where plot points were heavily reliant on geography. Like if they went here, then they got to go over here, and then this has to be here. So I have got like a rough idea of what the map looks like. But that outline, I successfully like finished the outline, but it was so daunting, and I know that book's going to take me forever to write. I'm just like, let's put that over here. Let's get a few more things out, and then we can sit down and probably take 3 years to write that.
You know, and there's so many artists and writers that have done things in the vein of somebody else, but it's not about doing that. It's about doing that and making it your own.
I've tried to do that. Like I've tried to resist making all my stories that happen in Clifton Heights be this terrible bad end. You know, there's some stories I've tried to intentionally make it unresolved, or intentionally maybe even make it like Mystery Road is not a horror novella. Okay, Mystery Road is like an homage to the Twilight Zone. There's a little bit of surrealness to it. There's maybe just a touch of eeriness to it, but I didn't want it to be a horror novel. You know, I don't want it to be like, this is a town where bad things happen all the time. This is just strange town.
Right.
You know, so I kind of what I'm trying to do is trying to make it my own. And there's another novella I wrote that's not read as much, but A Night at Old Web was published through Apocrypha, and that one's not horror at all. You know, I just wanted to make that again like a Twilight Zone coming of age story. So yeah, you got to do your best to make it your own, and then go from there.
You know, there's a similarity though that I noticed at least once. Charles Grant wrote a collection, I don't know what you'd call it, short novel called Nightmare Seasons. Yeah, really
good.
Yeah, so good.
So good.
And it's a wraparound, because at the beginning of the story, the protagonist in the wraparound, excuse me, he's a writer. He's doing research at the local library, as all of you guys know, and the librarian sees he's kind of struggling and, you know, banging his head against the wall. So she brings him this weird book and says, "Take this home and read it." You know, and he kind of resists at first, and then he does, and then you've got the same sort of setup, and things slip through.
Yep. And it yeah, definitely. I had so his I think Charlie's strongest work is his short fiction. And he's actually got, there's Nightmare Seasons, there's The Orchard, there's is it either Black Carousel, and then I can't remember the other one. It has to do with like music or wind, or I can't remember.
Dialing the Wind. Actually, that's the one book that of Charlie's that I brought up here because of that awesome paperback cover.
I have those paperback covers. They're just beautiful. So
yeah.
that I will admit is a total, and probably the book that bears the most resemblance would be my second book or my third book, Through a Mirror Darkly.
Oh, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Dialing the Wind is the same. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Because he wrote these novella quartets.
Yes.
That are all bracketed, and he resisted signing it as Charlie Grant until like the later books. It was just a unnamed author who lived in this town, and for better or for worse had found himself the chronicler of all the weird things that go on there. And he had an understanding with the sheriff, and yeah, I would have to say that definitely was, if I wasn't trying to copy it, I just it was something that had a lot of impact on me, especially. And I like wraparound stories.
Yeah,
Like
me too.
I love the Martian Chronicles and Dandelion Wine both have that wraparound structure. Winesbury, Ohio, it doesn't necessarily, Sherwood Anderson doesn't necessarily have the end to end brackets, but it's all stories in the same town. So I love books with that kind of structure. So
I do too. So why don't you maybe give a spoiler-free synopsis of Things Slip Through, since that's one of them.
so things slip through is a story about it's mostly about a sheriff who's new there, and he's trying to solve a missing boy case, and he seems to be is very flummoxed that everyone just in this town just seems to roll with all these strange things that happen. Cases aren't he's not able to solve them. People just pat him on the back and say, "It's okay, sheriff, you're doing your best." And as a
Right.
sheriff, he's very perplexed. Like I'm glad you don't want to fire me because I can't solve these cases, but we got to figure this out. And he's got this new group of friends from this town, and he senses that you guys are not playing straight with me. And one of those friends is an author who I'll admit he's probably a little bit of the cliched horror author, horror character where he was a big time author. Now he's fallen in grace and he's working as a high school English teacher and suddenly finds himself writing all these strange stories. He says, "Okay, sheriff, you want to know the truth about this town? Here's his book." And at first, the sheriff's like, "What you want me?" And then that comprises the short story in the collection. And throughout the collection, I try to there's connecting pieces where the author and the sheriff talk, and the sheriff's getting a clear picture about what's happening in the town.
Yeah, love that. I've actually got Nightmare Seasons up, and a couple of the passages I highlighted. The librarian says to the writer in Nightmare Seasons, "Take it," she insisted gently. Then she glanced toward the tall arched windows that made up the building's front wall. "It's the weather for it, believe me." And then he goes, "Well, if she was convinced," I'm quoting again, "that I would enjoy this book, then that was the end of it. It did not occur to me until much later that enjoy was a word she had not used once." So, so yeah, I love that structure very much. Uh, Rich, you got a question?
Yeah, I just I'm going through. I'm listening to I think it's Through a Mirror Darkly, and I have to say I love Father Ward's character. I have to say I was very surprised early on because I thought it was going to be a certain type of horror novel, and then there was a name thrown in there that folks who read cosmic horror, Lovecraftian horror will be familiar with, and it kind of threw me for a loop. But it's interesting that Father Ward, it's almost Derlethian rather than Lovecraftian, because you don't see
Not many people make that catch. Yeah.
and because you don't see anything again. Father Ward maintains his faith and his determination, at least so far as I've gone through, and I've just really enjoyed. I bought the I think the first volume on like ebook, but I have to say, are there going to be any other audiobooks of any of the other books in this series?
There was an audiobook of Devourer of Souls briefly for a couple of years, because Devourer of Souls was actually initially published through Ragnarok Publications, and then they just kind of and then there was an audiobook, but once that happened, that went out like I guess printing. The audiobook's not available anymore. As far as I know, I don't know any any plans for audiobooks at this time. So yeah.
Well, why don't you go through maybe a few of your books? Now, first of all, you've got some books that are awesome that we've been discussing, one or two of them that are available, say, on Kindle for Kindle readers. There's one, can't remember which one or two is actually on Kindle Unlimited. And then Things Slip Through, if I remember right, it was like $2.99 on Kindle.
Yep.
I mean, so there's an awful lot of reading for a very economical price. And then on the flip side, you've got a new book out that I
Yeah.
can't afford, and it's a limited edition.
Yeah, yeah. So there's the four core Clifton Heights books. There's Things Slip Through, Devourer of Souls, Through Mirror Darkly, and Things You Need. Um, Mystery Road also happens in the same universe. It chronicles Kevin Ellison, the owner of the bookstore, as a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, Mystery Road is the new one for those.
Yeah,
who
Mystery
don't know.
Mystery Road. Yeah, and that's there it is.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Paul.
That beautiful Ben Baldwin artwork. And Ben Baldwin does all my covers. He has a good sense of the story, and we have a good relationship. So,
I probably should be a better negotiator, Kevin. I should have said, look, you want to be on the show, sell more books. I need a signed, personalized copy of Mystery Road. But no, I'm kidding. It looks like it's a very beautiful looking book.
It is. It is. It's as Paul, I'm sure, understands. Working with Cemetery Dance does require a little bit of patience, just because they put out tremendous. And I'm very happy that that's only my first book with Cemetery Dance. I do have another book coming out with them.
Oh,
I don't
good.
know when it's going to be or anything like that, but that I've seen the illustrations for that one already, and it's stunning.
So this is Kevin Ellison, the owner of the bookstore in
Yep.
Clifton Heights when he's 14.
Yep. And there's another book in this series called A Night at Old Web. That is it's a novella that's published through Apocrypha. And again, it's another story about Kevin Ellison. This one being when he's like a senior in high school, So there's that one, and that's really all the Clifton Heights books. And I do have another book that was my very first book. It has nothing to do with any of these books. That I'm actually currently reading. I'm reading it for free just because of part of the coronavirus shut-in. It's called Hiram Grange and the Chosen One. So back when I was working with Shroud Publishing, Tim Deal, who used to run Shroud, he wanted to do a series based around this character that was like this occult hunter, investigator, but he had this whole laundry list of addictions, like opium, any drug he could get his hands on. Because he was like a less urbane Sherlock Holmes with even worse habits. And I was it was Tim Deal wrote the first book, Scott Christian Carr wrote the second, Rob Davies wrote the third, I wrote the fourth, and Richard Wright wrote the fifth. So we all wrote it together, and it's a really fast-paced, still very Lovecraftian, but with lots of explosions, a lot more gore than is in any of the more gore in one book and any Clifton Heights book combined. Lots of maggots and squishy tentacle things. And it was a lot of fun to write. And I'm actually just reading that for free right now on our YouTube channel, just because.
Lovecraftian with explosions and maggots.
Well, and fairy too. Queen Mab is in it as well. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Paul,
Kevin, I think you missed a Clifton Heights story, Long Night in the Valley, too, isn't that?
Oh yes, okay. So there is a book that there's a novella that I just wrote and released, and it's on Amazon, but actually it's on Smashwords for free if you want to get it. It's called Long Night in the Valley. It's again more of a Twilight Zone Halloween story.
Halloween, yeah.
Yep, Halloween story.
right up my alley.
Eventually, I've got another collection that I want to write that's going to be centered around that. It's a haunted ruined basketball camp, if that makes any sense. But there's a whole novella quartet I've got planned.
Oh, come on!
that.
There's a whole genre of haunted basketball camps.
Well, so that's actually a perfect example of how I write most of my stuff. So I always see stuff around me, and I'm like, well, this, like for example, the story about the guy lost in the furniture store. We have a furniture store here in this area that's in an old elementary school. It is the creepiest thing I have ever seen.
I thought that was so weird. I'm like, where did Kevin get that from?
Exactly. There's an auditorium full of these mattresses, and I'm like, my wife's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, look, I'm a horror writer. This is freaking me out. This is it's just so I see stuff and I write about it.
Don't you understand what could be in those lockers?
Exactly. That's why I tell her this is all wrong. There should not be a classroom full of baby cribs. This is pretty wrong. um, but I grew up playing basketball, and
That's
there's a
great.
big outdoor basketball camp that I used to go to every summer. And about 6, 7 years ago, I was up that way, and I thought I would stop by and see if it was still standing. And I found the thing just
Wow.
deserted and in ruins. And I was walking across it, and I just automatically thought, well, if there's a basketball camp on the outskirts of Clifton Heights, this is what it would be like. And I'm sure that I could write plenty of stories about guys whose careers have, risen and fallen because of this camp. And now, admittedly, in a very Serling-esque way, they've been drawn back to the ruins of the camp, too.
Yeah,
And that's
but
what
you
Long
know,
Night in the
a lot of readers really love that, though. Even if this story that you're writing doesn't have much to do with Clifton Heights, the fact that maybe you're writing it and it's on the edge of Clifton Heights,
Right.
it's like this Easter egg thing. And especially guys like, let me think, Pete Rollick and Rick Lay love all this interconnectedness. So, yeah. So tell me about this Kevin Ellison guy, because I noticed his first name is Kevin.
Mhm.
His last name is not Lucia, but tell me about him.
And Ellison is also my mother-in-law's maiden name.
So this is the alternate Kevin Lucia?
Well, he's the alternate Kevin Lucia that I actually like. Gavin Patchett is my nightmare self. Like, if I had never got married, and if I'd had the success that I dreamed of and then thrown it away, then I'm sure I'd be Gavin Patchett living out of a bottle,
Right.
scribbling down my nightmares. So I think in some ways Kevin Ellison and Gavin Patchett are unconsciously at first, but now probably consciously, they represent the duality of Clifton Heights. Most of Kevin Ellison's stories, like even Through a Mirror Darkly, those were horror, but you come back out to Kevin Ellison's reality, and it's not all that bad, and in the other stories. But then Gavin Patchett, my other have a novel that's being beta read right now, is that the two prime characters were Father Ward and Gavin Patchett. And unfortunately, I've unapologetically destroyed Gavin Patchett's soul. I've crushed the man. So, and that's all Norman Prentice's fault. If Norman Prentice is watching this right now.
Oh, he is he?
Yeah. What's that?
He is, huh?
Oh, good. It was Norman's fault. Norman told me one day, he said, Kevin, I love your work, but you're too nice to your characters. You need to hurt them
That's
more.
good advice.
And this is coming from Norman Prentice, who is the kindest person you would ever meet. So when I was writing The Mighty Dead, I'm just like, we're just gonna crush this guy. We need to leave him. We're gonna give him a little closure at the end, but we just kind of need to leave him a crippled emotional mess by the end of the book.
This couple just got together. They're really happy. How can we screw that up? That sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So I guess Kevin Ellison is kind of like that's the version of me I'm okay with, and then Gavin Patch is like if everything went wrong in my life, this is probably what I would look like.
Rick, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah. From reading things, it's obvious that you're a book collector because all your protagonists are book collectors, and we can see that behind you.
Yeah.
In a story called The Office, you had a section where the protagonist comes across a series of books that were collected by one of his older relatives, and there were these books from the 30s whose titles I'd never heard of.
Yes.
Like Devil's Mansion was one, House of Darkness. Do you really have those?
I do. So when I was 14 years old, so my great grandmother just had this huge shelf of these like old, these were pulp fiction. They were these old like detective mystery horror novels. And when I was I've always been a very omnivorous reader, but especially as a kid, I just read everything. Like probably every single book in my high school library was signed out twice by me, even the romance novels. Because this was back before Amazon. This was back before there was a Barnes and Noble, and I lived out in the country, so we only ever went in the city every now and then. So when you're out of reading material, you're like, all right, I don't want to read this love triangle, teeny bop romance, but I got to read something. So I was intrigued with those books. My great grandmother was like, well, I'm going to start giving I'll let you pick every month, however many you want. and then when you pass, you can have them all. So I spent like 8 or 9 months after that, just and that's where I first discovered Ellery Queen. I got a collection of Ellery Queen short stories and a bunch of others, and then when she did pass, I did get to keep those. So I have those here in my office, and those I do actually have those books that I got from my great grandmother.
This has nothing to do with really anything except that you've made me remember something I haven't thought about in 45 years. I was 6 years old. Parents took me to the library. I checked out a book. I had just one book that time, and I loved it. Read the whole thing that night, and went to return it the next day. My parents took me to return it the next day. The librarian and my dad, who's not a nice person, just yelled at me for, quote, wasting their time because they didn't believe I had read the entire book in the evening. I couldn't understand why they were mad. I just wanted to get another book. So, you know what? I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. I'm going to get hate mail because Bridget hasn't said anything this entire time. You have some questions for Kevin or comments or anything?
Sure. Yeah, I've just been listening and enjoying, but I do have a question. So,
Sure.
In the way that life imitates art, imitates life, you talked about writing about places you've seen and things that have happened that have inspired you. So, given the state of current events going on, do you think any of that will inspire, or has it given you ideas? Or is it more, I'm going to write something that has nothing to do with what's going on to escape it all?
So right now, and this is what usually my process is, ideas will bubble up, and I'll just tuck them aside, and I'll put them in a notebook, and I'll write on them later. I found that when you try to write in the middle of something too much, it's too easy to try to take reality and like turn it into a story. Like Gary Brownback also once said, he said that good fiction doesn't give a damn how it really happened. So what I found is, like, for example, my son is he's 12 years old, and he's high functioning autistic. When he was really young and we had first gotten the diagnosis, and it was a really rough patch of 3 to 4 years there, I tried to write a lot of stories about being the father of an autistic child, and I found that because I was in it, I wasn't really writing good fiction. I was writing about, it wasn't really like, and so I wasn't able to write any stories about that until we had moved to a better place. So I can tell you, especially, so this is, you see one wall of what I call my horror cave. It's also the studio for our YouTube channel. But I'm a teacher, so I'm currently teaching from home right now. And my son goes to an autism intervention school, so he's home with his school teacher. So every single day, I'm spending in this room from like 8 to 3. And there's been a bunch of times where I've got a side door that opens up because I live in the country. There's been a lot of times where I've been standing at that door, and thoughts have entered my head about a guy who's trying to weather out the apocalypse. A little kind of like The Office from Things You Need, but in apocalyptic setting. Like there's nothing left. He has no connections to anyone. All he's got is this horror cave and a lot of booze and nothing to do. Now I don't, that I will just tuck in the back of my head, and maybe like next summer I'll write it. When I've gotten some distance from it and I can still channel those emotions and feelings, but then try to build a story that's springing from it and not reliant on it. So yeah, definitely those thoughts have run through my head.
So you have like a commonplace book of sorts.
Well, and like in the thoughts, if I wrote a story about the apocalyptic, it wouldn't be about coronavirus necessarily. I don't think I'd even mention. It's just that thought of being isolated, of kind of seeing the world go to sleep around you, and in that quiet, what you might discover about yourself or the things that are hiding that are now coming out. So yeah, that thought has definitely crossed my mind.
Yeah, great question, Bridget. Anything else?
I have a question for Bridget after she's done now.
let's see. I was thinking of something. Yes, so for folks out there who may not be as familiar with quiet horror, we talk about the reveal versus not to reveal.
Mhm.
Do you think that there's a trend of that, of one or the other in quiet horror, or is there a way to handle the reveal differently?
So I think the challenge with quiet horror is exactly that. Do I show the monster at the end? There's plenty of Charlie Grant novels where he doesn't show the monster. And there's a joke. I don't know if anyone's read PS Publishing's Best of Charlie Grant. It's called Scream Quietly.
Yeah,
And
it's actually on Kindle now too.
yes, in
It
paperback.
was very expensive for a while, and then they put it on Kindle Unlimited, I think. So
When it came out in the hardcover, I just told my wife, just get that for my birthday. Don't buy anything else. Just buy that, and she got it. But it's now in paperback, which I'm very happy about. It's in paperback. But there's an essay in there. Somebody wrote. I can't remember who, and it's all the way across my office. I don't want to grab it. Where somebody said they were joking how they called Charlie Grant late at night, and he'd fallen asleep writing the conclusion to his latest quiet horror novel. So it was kind of like the implied joke there. It was so quiet that he fell asleep as he was writing it. I think that's something you have to weigh. Like there are some novels that Charlie Grant wrote that weren't very quiet. Like one that I don't think people talk about enough is this novel called The Nestling. It's about this Native American. It's basically a creature feature novel done in Charlie Grant style. But I think quiet horror has that. Like, am I going to show the monster? Am I not? I think as a writer, you just have to listen to the story. I think Stephen King said it best, although this aggravates the heck out of me sometimes, where he said the story is the boss. You get to the end of the story and you're like, the story is leading in a direction where I'm not going to show anything. Or you're writing and you're like, the story is telling me we need to see this. So I think, I don't know if that's a good answer or not. But
Oh, that's great.
what do you want to ask Bridget?
I do. You said you made creepy music boxes?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll have to touch base with you because that's obviously what the Horror Cave needs next is a creepy music box to go on the shelf. So
Awesome. I'd love to chat with you.
Yeah, actually, I've posted about it. I posted the link once or twice on the big eZine Lovecraft eZine Facebook page. But
cool.
just the other day, Bridget, I started updating the panelists on the. If you go to the Lovecraft eZine website and you click on podcast at the top left, then you can see the current or last week's video. You can get a link to the audio podcast, etc. And maybe most importantly, you can see two things. You can see the upcoming guest list, who are usually hyperlinked, and then you guys, the panelists. And I've got you down there, but I don't have you hyperlinked yet to that cool stuff. But I will do that, so that people can. What's the name of your website? If anyone just wants to Google it, Kevin, if you haven't seen it, it is fucking cool.
Yeah, I'm
It really is.
And I'm sure if my wife is watching this now, she's like, "Oh, great! He's gonna buy more stuff."
Come on, Kevin. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah. So you can Google, probably if you Google music boxes of the macabre, or you can Google my name, but the way it's spelled may be hard to find. But I also have a Facebook page, Dark Side of the Bridge, which is fairly easy to spell.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know about that. I'll have to check that out. Okay, so when I ask you guys, anyone who wants to answer this, but with special focus maybe on Kevin and Paul, I so much. I came to Charlie Grant pretty late. I think he might have even probably already passed away by the time I discovered him. And then I found the Black Oak series. And I just love this. There's this detective agency, and a lot of times they do normal stuff, but then a lot of times they are investigating these paranormal things. My favorite book is, I believe it's number 3, Hunting Ground, I think, where his staff basically forces him to go to Atlantic City on a vacation, and he takes two of the other guys. That's my favorite. And then I got to, I think, like the 5th one, correct me if I'm wrong, and then I'm like, there's this sort of cliffhanger involving one of the characters, and then there's no sixth one. So I'm like, oh god damn it.
He never got to finish that series, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it still is a good series though. Paul, what were you gonna say?
Oh, nothing really. I agree. It was a great series, and it was a shame that he didn't get a chance to finish it. But when you look at Charlie's work in general, there really was nothing that he couldn't do well. Yeah. Kevin mentioned The Nestling, which was quite frankly his attempt to have a big blockbuster horror novel after many small, quiet horror novels that came out and got appreciated by fans, won some awards, and was read by almost nobody.
Yeah.
And like we do, he needed to make some money, and he said, I'm going to sit down and write, the kind of horror novel that's making it onto the bestseller list. And a lot of us might say something similar to ourselves and try it and utterly fail. Charlie did it, and he did it brilliantly. The Nestling is wonderful. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be a big blockbuster bestseller, but it probably should have been.
It was really, really good. Another great novel of his is Raven.
Yeah.
That's I've read. I think I literally read that novel. I mean, granted, it was during the winter and I wasn't very busy, but I think I may have read that novel nonstop in 2 days. It was a very, very interesting novel.
The pet is really good too, and I have to say that
that was another one that when he was trying to appeal to maybe a more mainstream audience instead of his usual little cadre of quiet horror fans. Then he tried to branch out a little.
I got the audiobook of that. I've read it years ago, but I got the audiobook of that on Audible recently, and then started listening to it. I'm like, I know that voice. It's Chet. So yeah.
The best thing I think I've ever read by Charlie Grant was 668, The Neighbor of the Beast. It's just hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow, that doesn't ring a bell.
Well, so
under one of his pen names?
Yeah, Lionel Fenn.
Okay.
There you go. Well, that's why.
He wrote under 6 or 7 different pen names. So he was incredibly prolific, and the Kent, Montana series is just hilarious.
I've got one of his gothic novels that he wrote under a female pen name. I can't remember.
Felicia Andrews.
Yep.
Yeah.
Those are the only novels of his I don't have. I've got everything else. I just don't have any of the pen name novels.
I have a couple of I've showed it to some of the guys here. I think they're Charles L. Grant novels of some of the Universal monsters. One's Dracula, one's a mummy, one's a
Wolfman.
Yeah.
I've not read them yet though, but I have those 3.
I like the Wolfman one the best, I think. Yeah, the Wolfman one I like that one the best.
I just want to clarify for anyone who likes the idea of the Black Oak Detective series, which I do very much. Yeah, it's true that several things don't get resolved, that he was clearly working toward a resolution with his mother and so forth, and the protagonist's nightmares and all that. He's working towards a resolution there, which I wish I knew. But leaving that aside, if you like quiet horror and you like the idea of this, don't let that stop you from reading them. And definitely read them in order.
Yep.
So, although I'll say again, Hunting Ground, my favorite. Out there on the winter, in the winter at the Atlantic, and so there you go. So I just kind of want to run down a short list because we've talked a lot about Charles Grant, other authors, but you're our guest today. Things Slip Through. That's that. What was your term for it? I called it a wraparound, but you called it something else.
A link collection.
Yeah.
The way it works.
Yeah. Things Slip Through a Mirror Darkly, Devourer of Souls. I haven't read this. A Night at Old Web. What's that about?
Yep, A Night at Old Web. That's Kevin Ellison when he's 19 years old. It's really not a horror. It's just like it's like a Twilight Zone episode. Yep.
Okay.
The coming of age Twilight episode. Yep.
Rick was earlier talking about Things You Need.
Yep.
And I believe, Kevin, these are all available on Kindle as well, right?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Yeah. And if you are a Kindle, I'm a print book person and a Kindle person. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. And these are very economical if you are a Kindle reader. So yeah, check them out, read them. Anyone else have any questions or comments for Kevin before we move on? Paul, anyone?
Actually, I would say that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just. I thought, thinking about what Bridget brought up. I think, about the reveal. It's a really good, I think, issue or question to bring up. And I think I've mentioned it before on some previous episodes that I actually, ambiguity is, a thing now, more so than not. I think, and I actually miss the reveal. In too many movies, at least there's a, ambiguity. You don't get any resolution, and in a lot of horror, at least short fiction, there's a lot of ambiguity, and so I just find myself, at times missing the old school reveal.
Yeah, I recently watched Black Mountainside. And
Yeah, I saw that at Necronomicon. Yeah.
I really did miss. I wanted a reveal and I didn't get it. And
There's right ways and wrong ways not
Yeah.
to do that reveal too.
I think when if there's ambiguity at the end, it needs to be of the type where you could pick one or the other. Not
Yes.
versus like I'm not like, for example, my perfect example would be A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Trimber.
Who?
That's
Never
a
heard of
wonderful, wonderful postmodern novel where at the end you're like, man, this could have been it,
Right.
or this could have been it. I'm not sure which one. They both work, but you're just left with that. And Paul's the tension. I'm presuming. I always tell my students as an English teacher, I'm making a presumptuous statement. I don't know if the author actually meant this,
Sure.
but it feels like the tension that Paul leaves you with there is intentional and is part of the core of that novel. About what really happened at the end.
Well, yeah. First of all, he's an extremely good writer, so obviously that's intentional.
Wonderful, wonderful guy too. Wonderful.
Yeah, really nice guy. I've had him on here several times.
Yeah, but it leaves you with, though, there's a finite amount of paths you could take at the end, so
Yeah.
you have
Right.
an
Yeah.
idea
And there's still
of what could happen, right?
closure.
As opposed to House of Leaves, which I also love, but that novel just blows my mind. I'm not
Well,
sure
and
what to
Rich,
think.
and Rich also, as opposed to a writer who maybe isn't as good of a writer as he should be, and maybe he doesn't even know what he's doing at the end, and he just leaves it. I've read stories like that too, and they're frustrating.
Yeah.
and then you tell me to rewrite them.
Wasn't talking. I'm not talking about you all the time.
The hell you were. I know exactly what conversation we were having.
I have no memory of that, Senator. So
We talked.
I do not
we
recall
talked
that.
about that. We talked about this issue a lot when I was on here in January, and this idea of ambiguity, because I like to leave story endings ambiguously often, and you really get a division in the comments you get from readers. A lot of
Sure.
readers love it, and a lot of readers slam you for it. But I wanted to know what happened. He didn't take me by the hand and lead me to the answer and explain it to me.
Well,
And
I'll
again, I think you have to let as Kevin said, the story is the boss, and some
Yeah.
stories will benefit from the ambiguity and some won't. And you have to, as a writer, you have to, hopefully you're smart enough to figure out which are which.
Well,
Let me
I have
ask you,
to
Paul,
part
do you-
ways with Rich on that one because I love the ambiguity. So, but
No, no, I do love ambiguity. Like Head Full of Ghosts is perfect. The perfect example.
which,
of
by the
that.
way,
But-
before I forget to say, Paul's Head Full of Ghosts is. I read an article today. It's getting pretty close to being made into a movie.
Netflix treatment. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry, Rich. Go ahead.
So no, I just wanted to say, so for Paul, then, the comments you get then on ambiguity, are you able to? It's really interesting. I wonder what the age group is of the people who are comfortable with ambiguity versus perhaps a demographic that's more used to having the reveal. And maybe there's not that at all. But I know as an older guy, having grown up, at a time where you got the reveal in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. It seems like perhaps a younger demographic might be more comfortable with that in a postmodern, and perhaps not. I don't know. So are you able to tell with your comments any of the demographics for folks one way or the other?
No, not really. But if I had to guess, I think I kind of have a gut feeling that it's a lot of the younger, newer readers who are who are uncomfortable with the ambiguity.
Hmm.
And it could simply be a matter of they're newer to horror and they're not as used to the different possibilities, the different ways a story can evolve, and so they want something neat and clean that they can understand. I could be totally wrong, though. I don't really have a demographic breakdown. That was just sort of a gut feeling that the newer you are to the field, the more likely you are to want to have things explained to you, I think.
It's been said a million times, but once you reveal the monster or the horror, it's just not as scary. Um, for many of us.
With
Kevin,
exceptions.
yes, that's true. Kevin, your example, that is a great example with a head full of ghosts, and it makes me wonder. So how's the filmmaker going to treat that?
Yeah.
How's it going to end with the film? Are they going to keep to the spirit of that, or an adaptation is never the book, but that's not always a bad thing. So, I love the Lord of the Rings books, but even with 3 hour extended movies, you can't fit that all that stuff in there. You have to remain true to the spirit of it. You're not going to get Tom Bombadil in the movies. So.
Well, and another Paul Tremblay book, Cabin at the End of the World. You've got to use your head a little bit at the end of that one too. And you can take it you can take it maybe not a lot of different ways, but you can certainly imagine out the ending of that story several different ways.
Yeah.
And I know that there are readers who have been frustrated by that too. So.
Anything else, guys? Any other questions or comments for Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say regarding ambiguity, there's a classic of ambiguity that's been overlooked called Night Tide, made in 1961, with Dennis Hopper on YouTube. If you want to see an underwater version of Cat People, is the best way I can describe it.
There you
Was
go.
that the
That's
pitch?
the point right there.
People underwater.
So now, Kevin, I'm going to tell you how I discovered you.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember this or not. This has been like 5 years ago. So I read a Charlie Grant book, I think, for the second time. And I was like, oh my God, I can't be the only guy who loves the hell out of this stuff. And looked it up on Goodreads. And there's a comment from this guy named Kevin Lucia. And you said, I forget which Charles Grant book it was, but you said, I will never be this good, but that won't stop me from trying. So I was like, well, I'll have to check this guy out. So that's how I discovered you. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being here today and talking with us. Really great to talk with you. We're going to talk about a few other things. If you want to stick around, or you can leave if you got to go, whatever you want to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to point out, I've measured carefully. Everybody here is at least 6 feet away from each other. So, we're good. We've social distanced. So,
Actually, Mike,
you're right behind me.
Bridget and I have something to tell you.
Oh God, what?
No, just kidding.
You're in the apartment below.
I thought you were going to do what you did with Vince LaRosa to Joe Pulver.
That's right. Yeah, Vince was here once.
Yeah, you have similar background. Your wallpaper is similar, or your wall paint is similar.
Well, you and I have the same the door, so.
There you go. I have a sad attempt at a bookshelf, which is nothing.
You have Star Trek figures on your bookshelf.
Hey, I've got a whole shelf of Star Trek movies and books. Don't you just Star Trek Federation is one of the best novels.
It is
out.
a very good novel.
In honor of
Federation is
the
an awesome
finale
novel.
of Picard. So.
Right.
Oh, nice.
Did you watch that, Mike?
Yes, I've finished Picard.
I'm just 4 episodes in.
Okay, we won't
Well,
reveal that.
I was not disappointed by the little hint.
I thought it was a great ending.
I'm not going to spoil anything. All I'll say is that I really, really enjoyed it.
I didn't think they'd put all that hot sex Borg sex stuff on there, but they did, and it was great.
Yeah, well, it worked.
They had a Borgie.
I think we all like what you got a hint of. If you know what
Yeah,
I mean.
it was, and it was coming. It wasn't just that. I'd like to do a Patreon podcast, a spoiler-filled Patreon podcast on this. But Rick, it wasn't just that at the end. It was the whole build-up. I wish you didn't know this. That kind of thing. People burdened with knowledge that they wish they didn't have.
That would drive you insane.
Yes, absolutely. And Ben Handelman sent me a screenshot of a Q&A of Michael Chabon, who wrote the script, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And someone asked him if that ending was deliberate, Rick, was meant to be what we think it was meant to be.
Yes,
and he said, yes, I was absolutely going for that vibe.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, that doesn't surprise me because Chabon is a Lovecraftian.
Yes.
He's written 2 or 3 short stories. Cavalier and Clay is secretly set in a Lovecraftian universe. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he went that route.
Yeah.
He just based on his television work, he's one hell of a writer. I've read a few of his books, but just the stuff he's done for Star Trek, the episodes he's written have been uniformly excellent.
Yeah, Picard's pretty dark, but it's dark in a way that really works. And I really appreciated it. What, Kevin? Sorry?
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't seen it yet, but
Yeah, you definitely should. I hear a rumor that Patrick Stewart, because we're all on lockdown, made a deal for CBS All Access to be available to everyone for free, so they can watch it.
for like 30 days.
Yeah.
That's how I'm watching it.
Yeah.
One of the things I do like, and this is not a spoiler, Mandy and I are both this is why I can't watch more than the episodes I've watched. Mandy won't let me get ahead of her. She's watching with me. But one of the things that we're liking is that Picard is old.
Yeah.
And he needs people to take care of him.
Yeah.
He is not.
There's a scene in the very end that I won't give any specifics at all, I promise. But he's doing something that requires a lot of concentration that maybe in his younger days he could multitask. And the other person is saying, "Can you do this?" And he goes, "I'm trying to keep us from crashing if you don't mind." And she's like, "Oh, go. No, you go right ahead."
Yeah. But yeah, it's clear that he can't run. He can't do hand-to-hand combat that much anymore. I like the idea that they have there have been a few memes going around that people would really, really like to see a fantasy novel about an old woman who discovers that she's a witch.
Sure.
And then goes off on an adventure as 80 years old.
Yeah.
And, this is that kind of thing. This is a guy who is in his, remaining years, going on his last great adventure.
They say he's 94 in the series. Yeah, which, life has been lengthened by that time, but...
Right.
But he's still old, yeah.
Old.
He's an old guy.
Do you know what his real age is?
Isn't it like 76 or something? 78? I don't know.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, I know he's about 8 to 10 years younger than William Shatner, and I don't think that guy's ever going to die.
William
Shatner?
Shatner, yeah.
He's somewhere around 60, and he just looks the same.
Yeah.
Didn't he just get a divorce because he's seeing a younger woman?
Probably. I don't know. I don't know.
Shatner's like Dick Clark.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, yeah, I did want to talk about Picard, see what you guys thought of it, so I'm glad you guys brought it up. Let's see here. Okay, I'm reading, first of all, don't read, yeah. First of all, I did a Patreon podcast the other day with Brian Sammons, who has been reviewing horror movies for like 20 years, and watches he basically, this is not exaggeration, watches a horror movie every night with his wife, who loves horror as well. And so I basically I said, Brian, everybody's on lockdown, self-quarantine, isolation, whatever you want to call it, and recommend some good movies horror movies for us to watch, stuff that you've liked. Spoiler free, but tell us what you've liked and, give us something to do. So we did that for about an hour, and I will have that available for the Patreons probably tomorrow to listen to. So, and if you're not a patron, it's just $5 a month. Just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. It'll bring you right to it. Right now, I'm reading 2 books. Kevin Isn't Real, which was originally titled In This Way I Was Saved. And I found out about it because there's a movie called Kevin Isn't Real. And I really like the premise of it, but I thought, okay, I'll read the book first. The movie is, if you don't want to read the book, the movie is available on Shudder. So, probably all I should say about Kevin Isn't Real. And then I'm reading Those Across the River. I think I said that last week. That's really good. I'm about 75% of the way through that. So, which I wanted to ask you guys, including Kevin, any suggestions for people while we're quarantining here? What are you reading that you would recommend to people? Anybody? Or watching, whatever.
We watched Autopsy of Jane Doe on movie night last night.
Oh, God, that's a good movie.
That's a good one.
It was really, really good.
Yeah, that was very well done.
Yeah. That the first time you'd seen that, Bridget?
Yes. I don't know why I had waited so long to see it, too.
Oh, it's great.
It was great.
What the hell is that, Pete?
That's the top section of my recommended reading list for you.
That can't be. I don't see any Lovecraft eZine published books in there.
I would just comment, though, but if you do want to have nothing to do, why don't you join us for movie night on Saturdays? I looked through the list of titles we've gone over for most of the last 3 years. We've seen some really great stuff. So just
tell people how they can do that then.
Okay, what you do is download the app Cast, K-A-S-T, join the group eZine Movie Night. I only check the site about once a week, so don't get bent out of shape. Everyone gets accepted.
Let me ask you a question though. If somebody joins right on Saturday night, are you watching to let them in then?
Yeah, I've caught a few people like just 5 minutes after we started.
Yeah. Okay.
I
appreciate you doing movie night, Matt.
Well, it's
it
fun.
was just too much for me after a while.
Isabel doesn't like these kind of shows, so it's a chance for me to watch them. But at any rate, about 8:30 p.m. Central Time U.S., I'll post a link on the eZine Facebook page and on my page. And
go to Facebook and just type in Lovecraft eZine message board and ask to be invited, and that's where Matt's talking about. Go ahead.
And then about 9 p.m. we start streaming a movie, and if you want to, you can chat along.
Right.
We have a side chat bar, much like we do here.
And when Matt plays Safety Dance, you know the movie's about to start.
Sorry, what?
When Matt puts on Safety Dance, you know the movie's about to start.
So Mike, do your friends dance? I'm just saying, because if they don't dance...
No friends of mine.
Nope.
I can't dance, so, well, there you go. Anybody else?
You could do the safety dance.
What, you do a safety dance? What the hell are you talking about?
Stop watching the movies, Mike. You're not in charge anymore.
Yeah, I guess not.
Well, I have a couple books to recommend.
Sure.
So it's been out of print for a really long time, but Poltergeist Press brought it back into print. Shades by Jeff Cooper and Brian Keene. Really enjoyed that. Mary San Giovanni's newest one, Behind the Door. That was really, really good. What Do Monsters Fear by Matt Hayward. And if anyone hasn't seen or read A Penny for Your Thoughts by Bob Ford and Matt Hayward, that was really, really good too.
Okay. Anyone else?
I've got a graphic novel.
Yes.
Which came out actually 6 years ago, but I was unaware of it. There was a Django Unchained Zorro crossover by Quentin Tarantino. And it's
really?
It's a very well done action. The villain is based on a character called the Baron of Arizona, which was the basis for a movie with Vincent Price. So that was the big surprise when I was reading it. It was, if you know the story, there was actually a con man who claimed that he had a legal right to all of Arizona from the Spanish crown and nearly became ruler of Arizona in the 19th century.
That sounds cool. You guys talked about a movie called The Platform last week, and yeah, I only want to bring it up again just because, for whatever reason, I didn't hear that it was on Netflix. I thought it's the premise. I really like the idea of the premise. I haven't seen it yet, and today I found out it was on Netflix. I thought it was in theaters or coming to video soon or something like that. So yeah. Pete, do you have something?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, you sent me this, or you had this sent to me.
Right.
It's called Cromwell Stone by a German artist by the name of Andreas. And the artwork, first of all, is very Bernie Wrightson. Just this wonderfully detailed pen and ink drawings with a lot of texture to them. Just wonderfully detailed, interestingly paced, and has these wonderful, I don't know if you can see this, these wonderful sort of cosmic scenes in it.
What's the title again, and what's it about?
Cromwell Stone by Andreas.
Is this an ARC or is it available now?
It is available now.
Okay, Cromwell Stone. It's Cromwell Stone, not Cromwell's, looks like. Or is that what you said?
I'm not sure what we're saying is different.
Okay. I'm just trying to screw with your mind.
So the first it's set in 3 story arcs. The first story is about Cromwell fleeing in terror to his friend's house, and then he sits down and he tells him a story about, and basically fills you in that 20 years ago they were all on a boat, and the boat was shipwrecked, and they survived. 12 of them survived and always agreed to meet on this one day, but over the last 10 years, every year one of them vanishes with no explanation.
Nice setup.
Yeah, and so he goes to visit his friend to see what's going on with him, and no one in the town has ever heard of this guy. The house that he says he's living in is there, but nobody's lived in it for years. So he decides to rent the house, and then sort of dream effects, and he ends up walking on the beach down the cliff. Just weird stuff finally happens. Keeps going on and on and on.
That's such a great idea. It's like going back and renting the Marston house. Why wouldn't you?
There is that question, but in his mind, he's doing it to solve the mystery of his friend's disappearance. Even though they've been trying to figure out why everybody's disappearing, and there's only 2 of them left now. So maybe investigating the disappearances isn't such a good idea. But it really works. The back panel says it's Lovecraftian. I don't find it Lovecraftian. I find it definitively cosmicism, with maybe a touch of horror. But ultimately it works. I really enjoyed it. I have read it, I think, 4 times to try and really dig into it. And with each reading, it got better and better. There's more detail.
That's high praise. They wanted to send that to me, and I knew I didn't have time, and I knew it was something you would probably like, and so I'm glad you did.
I read it the first time, and I was like, oh, what did I just read? And then I read it a second time, and I was like, oh, okay. And I read it a third time, and it got a little deeper. And the 4th time I read it, it's like, whoa. And I started looking at the artwork in more detail and seeing how things were, the patterns were fitting into the story arc. And it really turned out really well. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. A gentleman by the name of Jonathan Sprague, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, Jonathan. I had a really nice email from him, I guess it's been a couple weeks ago now, and said, I'm not a patron, basically. He said, but he wanted to make a contribution to keep me going, which was a really nice surprise. And then I thanked him, and then he emailed me again today, and he said, I just have to read this email to you. Listening to your podcast, I love the withering wit of some of your panelists. He's probably thinking about Pete.
No,
It's nice to chuckle in these scary times. Also, a panelist recommended a book, The Return by Rachel Harrison. Was that you, Bridget?
No, that wasn't me actually.
Might have been Melissa. Uh,
no.
I know it was one of you. And he says, wow, I'm rarely frightened by scary books, but The Return is an exception. What a great, absorbing, and truly frightening novel. Thank the panelist who recommended this great book for me. It's truly a great read. So The Return by Rachel Harrison. I've not read it, but sounds like it's a great book. So, yeah, and anyone looking at me today and thinks, man, he looks terrible. You're right. I'm in a lot of pain from my illness, unfortunately. So, any other books you guys want to recommend or movies?
Yeah,
Or whatever.
I'm actually rewatching right now Ken Burns' documentary on Netflix of the Vietnam War. So I'm actually reading T.E. Grau's, I think it's called I Am the River. So it's set during Vietnam, and it was inspired by U.S. PSYOP operations during the Vietnam War, wherein we created these ghostly recordings based upon, or actually to target the Vietnamese belief that if a person died and was not buried either in Vietnam or was not buried in their home territory, they'd be forced to wander in torment. So we created these recordings of in Vietnamese with kind of Vietnamese ceremonial or funerary music, and then we kind of stretched it out and made it really eerie. So you have women and men crying out for their moms or crying out like, I don't know where I'm at, in Vietnamese. So it was meant to, would put speakers out into the jungle and basically scare the hell out of the NVA and the VC. And it, to the extent that it worked, and it did, it also, unfortunately for folks, drew machine gun fire. So they actually also played it from helicopters with speakers mounted on them. So you can actually listen to the actual ghost tape that we recorded during Vietnam on YouTube to hear it. It is really creepy. But that's what inspired T.E. Grau to write I Am the River. So that's what I'm listening to on audiobook, but I'm going to read this Stranger Things in Philosophy. I just picked it up. And I also have Doctor Strange and Philosophy. I don't know if this will be focused primarily on the movie or on the comic character, but I've got a whole library of these pop culture and philosophy books. I've got Alien and Philosophy.
Do you have Batman? Because someone just sent me Batman and Philosophy.
Actually, I have that one, yes. I've got Iron Man and Philosophy, American Horror and Philosophy, Dracula and Philosophy, The Undead and Philosophy. There's a whole series of books
Sensing a theme.
looking at pop culture from a philosophical point of view, and there are articles written by philosophers. Very, very just interesting series. I've got a whole section of them. But for now, I'm going to open up Stranger Things and Doctor Strange once I finish I Am the River.
I hope everybody is staying safe through these really, really strange times as best as you can. I hope that the listeners and viewers of this show, maybe it makes the social distancing a little bit more bearable. I also want to the 26th, Pete, is the anniversary where we lost Willem Pugmire last year, 2019. So, if you haven't gotten into W.H. Pugmire's work, you really should. Speaking of a guy who created his own town, Pete, you could probably describe this better than I can, but he was a very, very poetic writer.
Yeah, the Willem's work straddles the line between prose and poetry, and sometimes I don't know which one goes which way.
I always thought he was trying to. What he wrote didn't matter as much as he was trying to give you a mood, like trying to like when you write about what something tastes like.
Right.
That's like trying to read Willem's books. You can't read them quickly. You have to sort of dwell on them, and you can't, like sometimes you want to be in a hurry. And this is my collection. I'm gonna done in a week or 2 days. That's kind of the wrong approach. It's better to just linger over a story, set it down, come back to it.
Yeah, when I wrote the review for Tangled Muse, the Centipede Press collection that he did a couple of years ago, I did mention that is like, do not try and sit down and read these stories through. Read them slowly and one at a time. They're thick, and you've really got to take some time to get through them. And it may, if you try to rush it, it might leave you with a bad taste in your mouth because you're trying to force something down that's just not meant to be forced down. Something to be taken in smaller doses.
We talk about creating a location because everyone talks about Lovecraft's Arkham, and then the idea was you create your own place of weirdness, and he created the Sesqua Valley in the American Northwest, where rises the Twin Peaks of Mount Celta, and the inhabitants of the Sesqua Valley are not wholly of this world. It's very hard to find. If you visit it, you might not leave. You might not remain human. And there were certain characters. A few people have written stories set in the Sesqua Valley, but I kind of, this is me being selfish. I want it to be left alone, so that it's Willem's voice that I hear when I'm reading a Sesqua Valley story. If you want, probably the easiest collection to pick up, I think it's still available, is The Fungal Stain, because it's readily available from Hippocampus Press. And I think they also have
Other Dreams, I think.
Some of his books are very hard to come by, is all I can say.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I have a story. I took Willem's death really hard.
Yeah.
Because he and I were. I like to think we were close. We talked a lot. We exchanged books back and forth. And I had a hard time dealing with it, and I finally broke down and I wrote something to purge myself of what was going on in my head. And I didn't intend this, but I sent it just to a few friends to look at, and somebody sent it on to somebody else. And I'm glad to say it's going to be published this year. But it deals with the very thing you're talking about, how Sesqua Valley should be left alone. And how his death should cause that to be fallow ground for a while.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I look forward to reading your story.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of grateful for Gmail because we exchanged so many emails over the past. It was 8 year span that I knew him, and they're all still there. So
yeah.
Can I just comment? This is very interesting. Often people will say, like, Lovecraft wrote so many innumerable 100,000 letters that were often pages and pages long of tiny script, and you say, what would have been like if he had been in the modern era and had access to ready communication? And when I first wrote to Willem, it was in the very early 2000s, and he had never been on the internet. He was very poor, living hand to mouth, and he would write these long letters because his heroes were like Oscar Wilde and Lovecraft. So he wrote long letters, and I have a few handwritten letters from him that I cherish them. And then it's like he had to go back home to take care of his mother in the last years of her life. And so suddenly he had food, shelter, and an internet connection. And you could just see what happened over the next 1 to 2 years. Suddenly, he's writing reviews everywhere. His books are being more widely published. He is having a channel where he is regularly blogging. And he was really so happy to suddenly be connected to everyone who loved Lovecraft like he did. And I think that is kind of a good what if scenario. What if Lovecraft had an internet connection? You know, it's sort of like, I think that's Willem's story. He was very much a recluse antiquarian, so more isolated than Lovecraft ever was, and then suddenly, in the last decade of his life, he was really happy to have those connections.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites of his is The Revenant of Rebecca Pascal. He co-wrote that with David Barker, but that's pretty accessible. You know, that's one to maybe start with too. I was just looking for it just now, but I can't find it. Sure, I'll find it as soon as the show's over. But he wrote me one of the emails he wrote me in 2012. He said something to the effect of, you know, he's happy to be known as a Lovecraftian fanboy, a Lovecraftian writer, and he goes, I'm just going to keep scribbling. Who knows how long I've got, you know? And I reread that right after his death, and yeah, it's tough. He's missed. So, I
guess the other thing we should talk about is the death of Stuart Gordon.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Nice guy.
Was a really nice guy. You know.
We went to we saw Dagon on the big screen at, what was it, Necronomicon?
Yeah. And
he introduced it and made some comments afterwards.
Right. And yeah, so the funny thing is that, you know, you were with me that most of that time. I was stalking him for the entire weekend, trying to get him to sign my copy of the Reanimator novelization.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah. And no matter, you know, I was in the audience, and I would go up to try and get, and you know, he would be gone. He wasn't avoiding me, but everything was just not working out. I finally just gave up.
No, I talked to him about it. He said he was avoiding you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, nice.
No.
And then you and I were having breakfast on Monday morning.
When everything's over with, and most people are gone.
And my book is packed away in a suitcase, and he sits down at the table next to us.
Yeah. Yep. Pete will never forget that. He didn't get his signature.
And then I'm like ripping through my suitcase, throwing underwear out, and, you know, just like trying to.
Oh, did you get it signed?
I did. I got it signed.
I can't remember. Did you run up there and get your? Is that what you did?
I just no. I politely introduced myself and said, "Look, I've been trying to see you all weekend, and I haven't been able to get it." But yeah, I got my copy of the novelization of Reanimator signed.
You know what? I've never asked you this. Did you tell him about stealing the car to
I
watch?
didn't have a chance.
Oh,
because
he would have loved that, man.
Look, the guy, you know, was eating breakfast. I'm trying to be polite, because right now I'm fanboying.
Okay, in between eating your eggs, Mr. Gordon, when I was 16, I stole my grandmother's car so I could go see Reanimator.
I was 17, but yes, I had to be 17 because
that's the short version of this tale.
Reanimator was the first NC-17 movie, one of the first ones. So.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Kevin, I really, really appreciate talking with you and you taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, that's awesome.
And Paul, thank you for being a guest panelist. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. It was a pleasure.
Matt, you have a prize.
Yes. One reminder about the prize. It is a copy of The Red Brain, the paperback version from Dark Regions Press. Send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put brain in the subject line. I will choose a winner in about 2 weeks. Just so you all know, I have several books backed up to ship, but until the restrictions are lifted, I'm not going to the post office. So it's all just pretend right now, but it will happen.
Yeah, this is, again, we're recording this on March 29th, 2020. So if you're listening to this in your car, well, I guess you may not be in the next couple of weeks. But if you're listening to this in the next couple of weeks, you still have a chance to win that. So,
Matt, do you have an eStamps account?
Who?
An eStamps account where you can print out postage?
Oh no, I send these all.
You're
media
talking
mail.
to a guy with an AOL.com email address.
Yeah.
Pete.
Okay.
I don't understand. They don't understand the reference.
So you can set up an account online with an electronic service, and you can just buy postage and print it.
If all I'm doing is sending like 2-3 packages a month.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It doesn't cost you anything. You print the postage out, you put it on your doorstep, and the post office takes it away.
Wow.
Oh.
But you know,
I could do that on my son.
you could. To be surprisingly honest, eBay is really picking up for me right now. It's,
Cool.
I'll
Good.
bet
Good
it
for you.
is.
just selling lots of books.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. Bridget, thanks for putting up with all of us. Next week, our guest is Michael Cisco. So that should be really, really good. Yeah, okay, you did the prize. Michael Cisco next week. Thanks everybody for listening. Kevin, again, thanks for being here. Paul, and we'll see everybody next week.